Let's talk a little bit more about this. We want to bring in our host of News Nation's On Balance, Leland Vittert, joining us early this morning. Leland, I have these questions scripted out that I want to get to, but I think the first question I would ask you off the cuff is the story here that the buses are taking migrants to cities where we're actually making news? Because all of this is happening anyway. Everything that's happening in New York or in Washington, D.C., has been happening now for quite some time.
Well, not only has it been happening for quite some time, it's been happening in New York and it's been happening in D.C. for quite some time. We were down on the border back in September and saw buses and planes taking people to both of these cities. I was sat in the airport in McAllen, Texas, with hundreds of illegal immigrants. Asked them where they were going. Some of them were going to Washington, D.C. Some of them were going to New York, all paid for by charities or family members that had offered them tickets. The only reason that this is a story now is because the Texas governor is paying to do the very same thing that the federal government was very excited the charities were doing for the past 18 months. It's purely a manufactured political issue. And it appears as though Greg Abbott is just fine to make it a manufactured political issue. And suddenly now the world is focused on the fact that there is a crisis on the southern border, albeit even though he's being made out to be a villain in the situation. And the flip side is, as you can see, Eric Adams is more than happy to enjoy the spotlight. There have been tens of thousands of illegal immigrants showing up in New York every week before this. He didn't care then. He only cares now that he can make a political point about this with the Texas governor and get on every morning show saying, oh, my God, what the Texas governor is doing is so inhumane, and New York is stressed, and we're using taxpayer funds, but we are here to welcome people.
Yeah, it is fascinating to me. I, too, covered the border crisis in McAllen, and on my flight, there were people who were traveling just like these folks here with their folder in hand or their manila envelope that had in Spanish resources to find an attorney because they have to turn themselves into ICE. Not everyone does that. Not everyone can be tracked. New York City officials are now accusing Texas Governor Greg Abbott of hiring private security to make sure that immigrants on board the buses actually stay on board. But do we know anything about that? Can we confirm that that's really happening?
You would think that, of course, there would be security on the buses. A lot of these people who come across the border are, shall we say, less than savory individuals. And certainly some of the ones that we encountered when we were down on the border, we found that to be true. I'm unclear as to what the outrage would be. It seems as though the outrage would be if something happened on the buses and somebody got hurt, that you would then say, why wasn't there security on the buses? What's confounding to me about this story is the willingness of so many in the media to fall in line with the narrative that somehow Greg Abbott is doing something wrong or different than what all of these charities have been doing for 18 or 20 months. And that, to me, the question more is, why is everyone holding out Mayor Adams and Muriel Bowser in D.C. and covering the strain that is being put on their cities by these immigrants when they didn't care about the thousands upon thousands of illegal immigrants showing up in their city? In fact, there were planes landing in Westchester County, chartered by the Biden administration, bringing illegal immigrants to New York City. I didn't see Mayor Adams go out and greet a single one of those people over the months that happened.
So what is the solution here? What is the outcome of all of this? Can we get any closer to immigration reform with all the attention the story's getting?
We haven't gotten any closer to immigration reform for 30 plus years. Every president since George W. Bush has failed. So is there more of a political will because of this? I don't know. I haven't, at least from my reporting and talking to congressmen and senators in Washington, found any. If you'd ask Abbott or Ducey, the governors of Arizona and Texas, about why they want to do this, it is that it focuses America's attention on the border. And their hope would be that there is increased funding to close the border, number one, and put up meaningful barriers to entry. And number two, that the Biden administration, by pressure from these mayors and from mayors of other cities, would begin to think about changing their policies, because it's very clear the reason all these people are showing up is because they believe that they are going to get a free pass into America, which a majority, if not a vast majority, do. So therein lies what the answer is. What we saw during the Trump administration, when people realized that they weren't getting in, even if they crossed the border, they weren't going to be released into the United States, people stopped coming. It's expensive to come. A lot of people are paying up to $25,000 to be smuggled across.
Yeah. And again, the political wheel of this story sometimes loses perspective. And the fact is that a lot of these border towns have been saying the same thing. I keep saying that. Democratic mayors in towns close to the border have been saying we don't have enough resources either. And so eventually we're going to have to come up with something, some sort of solution. Leland Vittert, thank you very much. You can watch him every weeknight, starting at 7 Eastern Time, 6 Central. Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.